Okay, AP Psych, here we are in Unit 8B. 8A was discussing motivational theories, and so 8B is going to talk about emotions, and the big example we'll do in 8B concerning emotions is stress and stress management. But before we do that, we're going to start off with theories of emotion and embodied emotion. So the main theories of emotion, and then physiologically what we're talking about when we talk about feelings. And so before we get started into the theories, let's give a definition of emotion. Emotion is just the response of the whole organism. So that would involve physiological arousal and expressive behaviors and our conscious experience of a feeling. And so when we talk about emotions or feelings, we're not just talking, about internal. We're talking physiologically internal. We're talking cognitive, and we're also talking about how those feelings are expressed in our behaviors. This is always a big one on the AP test in May. There's inevitably at least one question related to the theories of emotion, either specifically about one of the three theories or a comparison or contrast type question regarding the three theories. And so, the names that appear, James Lange, Cannon-Bard, Schachter-Singer, are just going to be the psychologists that developed the theory. Some of them working together on the theory, like in the case of Schachter-Singer. Some of them, not being contemporaries, but just building upon an earlier theory, like in the case of James Lange theory. And so, what's the difference between the three theories or explanations for emotion? The James Lange theory is going to say that first we experience some sort of physiological response to something, and then comes our experienced emotion. And so the James Lange theory is saying that our emotions are simply our awareness of our physiology, or our labeling of a physiological feeling. The Cannon-Bard theory felt that was somewhat limited, in that a lot of emotions that we have physiologically are similar. So like the nervous system's response is almost identical. And so how is it that you can label, if the James Lange theory was completely true, the Cannon-Bard camp doesn't understand how everything is physiologically different or physiologically the same, but can be viewed as different emotions. And so the Cannon-Bard theory would say, no, emotion is a simultaneous arousing of some sort of physiological response, and then our subjective interpretation of that emotion, or our subjective experience of that emotion. All right, and so those two kind of the warring camps for a while. And then along comes Schachter-Singer. Please know that Schachter-Singer, you should also write two-factor model. The two-factor theory or Schachter-Singer, it's the one and the same. But in order to experience emotion according to the two-factor theory, you are physically aroused and cognitively able to label the feeling. It's not, they agreed with James Lange that the physiology is what stems our emotion. But they agreed with Cannon-Bard that because emotions are physiologically similar, that cognition has to play a role. Okay, and so both of these play a role. James Lange says it's more physiology. Cannon-Bard said it was more subjective thought. Schachter-Singer is saying both. If that is somewhat confusing to you still, bring questions. We'll do some more examples. And please know that there is a chart with an example on page 368 of your book that is of immense assistance should you need it. Okay, so physiologically, what is going down? Let's do some review of Unit 3. The autonomic nervous system is divided up into two parts, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Remember that parasympathetic is what prepares your body for action, while parasympathetic calms the body down after a stressor is removed. And so as we were looking on the earlier slide with the different theories of emotions, there are a lot of physiological similarities between emotions. Different emotions, look the same. Like the autonomic nervous system is responding in the same way for a lot of these. And so why do they feel and look different to us if they are physiologically so similar? Well, there are going to be some differences, and we found through research that the differences are usually all within the brain and in what part of the brain is activated with a particular emotion. And so, the negative emotions kind of lean towards the right hemisphere, positive ones to the left. Don't be too oversimplified in that right brain, bad, left brain, good. But that probably has a lot to do with the fact that the left frontal lobe just has a lot of dopamine receptors, and we know that that's, happy, feel-good neurotransmitters. So that's probably more of the reason why. So, concerning physiology, they're very similar, nervous system wise, but then when we get to central nervous system, particularly brain, we do see some subtle differences. And so that's, could have to do with the fact that, when we talk about these different theories, why the two-factor theory tends to be so popular now. Okay, so how do those affect the three theories? Okay, so James Lange, let's review. They seem to be onto something, that there maybe are some subtle physical differences between the emotions. I mean, at the time, maybe not specifically knowing where in the brain, but maybe where in the brain does affect it. So maybe it is physical, then labeling of the physical feeling. We also know from experiments on paralyzed people that they actually feel less emotion as well as having less feeling in the body. And so that would seem to support the whole James Lange theory. But the Cannon-Bard theory was onto something as well, that true feelings require some thought. So it's probably the two-factor theory that fits the best, because emotions rely on our interpretation of the body's events. And so there's your physical element concerning cognition and emotion. We've got some things to look at here. Can our thinking alter our response to an event? I guess is the question to ask here. Schachter and Singer seem to think so. And so one of the experiments they did is that they injected some college guys with adrenaline and then asked them to wait in a room where they had an accomplice acting either happy or irritated. Most of those guys felt little emotion because they kept attributing their physical feelings to the fact that they had just been injected with adrenaline. But if the participants were told that the injection had no effects, like they weren't told that, that we're pumping you full of adrenaline, then they seemed to, for lack of a better word, catch the emotion in the room. And so that's something to really keep in mind, that arousal fuels emotion, but that our thoughts, our cognition channels it. And so, that could also explain why, concerning like personal differences in thought process, like some people are easy to fly off the handle and other people tend to be able to keep their emotions in check. All of that kind of plays a role again in support of that two-factor theory. There are some other important experiments that we can talk about. We can talk about Robert Zient's experiments where he found that people would respond to subliminal cues of emotion. And so, like, emotionally charged words that were flashed on a screen were easily remembered and identified versus neutral words. And so kind of think back to that when we talked about that in Unit 7 concerning, like, things having an emotional tie, being able to be easier to remember. And so, we do tend to be in tune with subtle emotional cues. Joseph Ledoux did some research where he found the answer to why in neuroscience. And it seems to be that some of our emotions bypass cortex stimulation and go directly from our senses to our amygdala. And the amygdala sends information to the cortex more than the cortex sends info to the amygdala, if that makes sense. Which explains why sometimes it is hard to cognitively get a hold of yourself. Why sometimes the emotions can get the best of us, or why sometimes they seem like a reflex, or why sometimes, you just fly off the handle. And that was also studied by Richard Lazarus, where he would use mild electric shock and could get people to react without realizing that they were. Something that was called is called subception. And so again, like it's like that whole chicken or egg question. Do our thoughts control our emotions, or do our thoughts simply just reflect physiologically what is happening in our bodies in a response to a situation? And so you've got your 3 different explanations to answer that question. And I will answer any of your questions when you come to class. So thanks for watching.